So this is the slide advancer, this
Yes.
gizmo here?
Yeah.
All right. I guess green goes forward and red goes back.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. How you doing?
Doing good.
Gonna be a full house?
Yeah, we've got close to 400 people, like 390. You know, a lot of these guys come because they network. It's a business conference. So. But you never know, especially with the subject of today. All right, I got 8:30. Quinn, we good? Live? All right, welcome everybody. Wait a minute, hang on one sec. Do we have anybody in the room? I need Maria Salgado. Oh, there she is. Okay, thank you, Norbert. Come over here. Good morning, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Eugene Jones. I'm the executive director for an organization called the Southern Waste Exchange. We are a small nonprofit out of Tallahassee that basically assists industry and municipalities with waste issues. We're kind of a clearinghouse in that function, putting waste generators in touch with waste users, as well as do a number of different events in the environmental sector. We're running right now, I think, 4 different conferences related to recycling, waste management, remediation, PFAS, a host of environmental topics. If you allow me, I'm going to make a couple of quick opening comments. Hey, Quinn. That may be my header slide. All right, there we go. A couple of quick opening comments. Howard already told you to turn your cell phones off, so thank you, Howard. Saves me a step. Proceedings, everything that you see that will be shot over the next day and a half will be, we are recording this. Welcome virtual attendees. We are doing this via Zoom, and everything that we are doing will be compiled into PDF presentations that we'll email out post-event along with the video recording. So if you miss something over the next day and a half, you'll be able to come back and catch it. List of participants, we will be sending out the list of attendees, names and affiliations to everybody. The sponsors, exhibitors are going to get the list with contact information. So if you do not want your information released, email, that sort of thing, please let me know so we can exclude you. Bathrooms are directly across this hall by the escalators. Certificate of attendance, if anybody needs continuing education, we've got a lot of PEs, PGs in the room. We do offer that, a certification process. It's $25 processing fee. And then we'll provide an affidavit of attendance, which you'll fill out noting what sessions that you've gone into, and then we'll record that and send out the certificates. Receptions and breaks, everything is going to be in the exhibit hall, which is the executive ballroom. Social media pages, you know, the importance of conferences like this is the networking that takes place. So I encourage everybody to join our LinkedIn and Facebook group pages. Scam notice. I have to advise everybody, do not buy a list of attendees from anybody that tries to send it to you by email. There's a scam within, just across industries, it doesn't matter whether it's environmental or whatever. Well, people will try to sell you a list of attendees or try to get you to make a hotel reservation. We won't contact you for either of those items, so don't do it by email. Lastly, we do have a few openings for Topgolf tonight, so if anybody has an interest in joining us, it's a 3-hour reception. It's $50. It includes open bar and wine, open beer and wine, I should say, as well as some hors d'oeuvres. So if anybody has an interest, let us know at the registration desk. Quickly, I need to thank our sponsors. If it weren't for our sponsors, we couldn't put this event on. So our gold sponsors, EnviroServe and Verdatas. Our silver sponsors, our media and supporting organizations that help get the word out about the event, and then the conference organizers. Lastly, a couple little comments related to future events. FRC will be back here, same hotel next year, November 3rd through 5th. PFAS Forum, if you have an interest, we will also be here April 9th through the 11th. And then lastly, and it's probably to me one of the most important things, is to dedicate this conference to this man right here. Many of you who have been to this conference and other environmental conferences knew Jim Clark. You couldn't not know Jim Clark if you attended these events. What a fantastic guy. And so in his honor this year, we are doing a fundraiser for Captain Jim for the Jimmy V Foundation. So with that, in particular, it's for cancer for pediatrics. So we're going to be raising funds tonight. We're going to do a 50-50 raffle, just like what we did last year, if you'll recall. So the winner will have the option to either take half the pot in cash or the bottle of Pappy, if you have an interest in that. If you choose the bottle of Pappy, the cash is going to go to the foundation. If you choose the cash, we're going to auction off the bottle of Pappy. And Howard has already told me that nobody's going to outbid him.
And nobody did last.
Yeah. And then the last thing that we will draw for is the drum of cheer. If you're not familiar with that, we've got a drum, I think it's on booth 313, where we had exhibitors and sponsors bring in bottles of booze, and so we'll be drawing that as the last event. So with that, my opening comments are done, and I am going to turn it over to Howard Nelson, who is a partner and head of environmental practice with Bilzin Sumberg. So, sir, it is all yours. And I'm taking this with me.
Thank you. That is a very good idea to take that with you. Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody has had a chance to vote, and if not, we're going to be rounding you up afterwards to make sure you get out to vote. Very, very briefly, because we've got a tight time schedule and a phenomenal opening session, but I want to thank Gene and the entire SWIX crew for, once again, a great Florida remediation conference. We've got a lot of good stuff. We're starting off this morning with an update on the FDEP cleanup programs. Tim Bahr, who's the director of Division of Waste Management, is here with us. We've got Maria sitting right next to me, FDOT Roadway Incident Spill Containment. Maria, Eric Krebill, who's sitting there, and is Pietro with you? And Pietro, the three of them, and we'll pull the two others of them up here. And then batting cleanup is Ralph DeMeo with his PFAS litigation update. What I'm going to ask you guys to do so that we can stay on time is hold your questions till the end of the presentation. I'm going to be trying to get everybody in and out within their half-hour time slots so that we can still make it to the break. And lastly, if Gene's still in the room, I wanted to thank him for giving me the easiest speaking job in the entire conference. Tim?
All right, voila. Hey, good morning, everybody. So yeah, as Howard said, Tim Bahr, Director, Division of Waste Management. It's always good to be down here speaking to, I think, largely a bunch of professionals that are heavily involved in really the techniques and the technology of the remediation programs and all that. I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more on just where we came from and where we're currently at within our various cleanup programs, a little bit more of a history and current status type thing. I guess maybe before we do that, kind of always good to know who we're talking with today. I assume there's quite a few engineers in the room. Engineers, yeah. Geologist, legal folks. Yeah, okay. Scientist. All right. So a little bit of the history part. So, think about cleanup programs. We're about in sort of the 40-year time span of when we first started seeing cleanup sites, at least in Florida anyway. You think back to the federal programs, CERCLA, 1980, RCRA-HSWA, 1984, State of Florida, Petroleum Cleanup Rule, 1987. I'm going to date myself a little bit. That's the year I started with the department, 1987. So we've been doing the petroleum cleanup for a long time, and we've evolved into a variety of other cleanup programs. So we're going to talk about some of those today and kind of where we're at with those various programs. All right, you all are looking up there, and I'm looking down there. All right, so this kind of just shows the listing of the programs, but kind of start with the bubble on the sites, and just kind of quickly think about it. There's less than 50,000 cleanup sites in Florida. The good news is a fair amount of those have been cleaned up over those many years. We didn't know about all of them 40 years ago, but as we've discovered them through various means and ways, some of them through incentive programs, state-funded programs, and the like, we're now at having cleaned up about 74% of that less than 50,000 sites around Florida. So what I want to kind of do for this session is just kind of go through those various cleanup programs and just give you a quick snapshot of where those individual kind of programs are at in their cleanup programs. And I guess maybe before I jump into the individual ones, the district responsible party one, the one that's shown on the bottom, I'll go ahead and kind of talk about that one first. Since those of you that work with our 6 district offices around the state on the responsible party sites of all different variety and sources or whatever, we are now at about 5,716 responsible party sites around the state, with about 77% of them having been cleaned up. And when I say cleaned up, I mean where the contamination has been addressed, either to no further action without controls or with a no further action with control situation. But either way, the contamination has been adequately addressed on about 77% of those responsible party sites. First, I mentioned the CERCLA Superfund, the National Priority List sites. For Florida, we're talking about 76 sites that we started with, and about 37% of those have went through and got what's called a delisting, where they've met the cleanup criteria under the Superfund program. An example of some that are currently in the hopper, because there is some and there was some extra funding provided by the EPA under the BIL law. So a lot of our states, otherwise we have to provide a 10% cost share. And I don't know if this is Superfund music or not, but so under the BIL, the EPA does cover the 10% cost share, so Florida does not have to pay for some of our current remedies that are going on at Superfund sites. We do have a pretty big Superfund site down in Pembroke Park, North Miami, called Petroleum Products. It's a little bit of an oddity because it's also eligible for a state cleanup program in the petroleum, what was the early detection incentive program. So the state is actually going to be doing a solicitation for the final remedy for the petroleum product Superfund site in the near term.
I'm impressed you keeping your own background.
All right, so our sort of, if you think about it, there's the federal Superfund program, and then there's sort of the state's mini circular version of having our own cleanup program, and we call it the state-funded site cleanup program. This is for sites that where there's not a viable responsible party. We're currently and the funding for this comes out of the Water Quality Assurance Trust Fund. We're at about 110 sites historically in the state-funded cleanup program, and we've cleaned up about 44%. So we're doing a little bit better than the Superfund, but not near as well as we are in some of our other programs. Go to next, the dry cleaning state-funded cleanup program. I know it's pretty hard to see the numbers there, but about 1,400 plus sites eligible for state funding in the dry cleaning program. And we've addressed about 21% of those. So I think this is a good time to kind of talk about the funding. So there is a dedicated funding source as part of the Water Quality Assurance Trust Fund that pays for the cleanup of these eligible dry cleaning funding sites. We usually get around 8 million, 7 million, 8 million appropriated per year for the dry cleaning sites. With that funding, we're currently working on like 368 of those 1,408 sites, and we've closed about 300 of them. So still about 740 awaiting funding. So we've addressed about 21% of those. So that's still a lot of work to be done there, obviously. The Brownfields program, a voluntary program akin to revitalizing properties around the state. For this program, there are some incentives that also go along with the entering into the program and signing a brownfield site rehabilitation agreement with the department. There's also some liability protections and some tax credits that can be utilized. There's also sort of some grant funding that we work through with from EPA that allows some assessments to take place utilizing the grant funding. Numbers-wise, we're up to about 500 plus brownfield site rehabilitation agreements. And we've addressed about 50%, a little bit under 50% of the brownfield sites that have entered into the program. So we also have a state-owned land cleanup program to clean up our state properties around the state. This is also either funded out of the Water Quality Assurance Trust Fund or the Inland Protection Trust Fund. And for these, we've been working on about 467 state property sites over the years, and we've cleaned up about 70% of those. Do a lot of work with the military. Any folks here working with the military or NASA or one of our other federal partners on their cleanup sites? Got a few. So within the military, if you can imagine, Florida has a heavy military presence. I mentioned we also have Kennedy Space Center and some of the other services that are shown here as considered federal programs. Out of those programs, there's about 1,768 contaminated sites across those facilities, and the federal government, working with the federal government on those, we've cleaned up about 66% of those federal government sites. Then we go to what's called the FUDs, the formerly utilized defense sites. A heavy military presence back during World War II, especially in Florida, left sort of some legacy sites that await congressional funding. The Army Corps of Engineers runs this program. Looks like we potentially have around 516 FUDs scattered around the state of Florida, and then And the Army Corps is currently working on about 33 of those sites, investigating them. And those can be anywhere from sort of hazardous petroleum type contaminations to unexploded ordnance and those kinds of things also at a lot of those sites. All right, I mentioned the federal program earlier on for Florida, RCRA, HSWA. Florida took over the HSWA adoption in 2000, so quite a few years after EPA ran the program for a little while. Some pretty good progress has been made. About 259 RCRA, HSWA, what's called corrective action universe sites in Florida, and we've addressed about 77% of those. Then we get to the petroleum cleanup sites. I'm going to first talk about sites that are eligible for state funding here in Florida. I mentioned the first rule that Florida had in the cleanup universe was for the petroleum contamination. Back in 1987, 17-70 as it was called back then. Through the early detection incentive program, a liability insurance program, an abandoned tank program, and some other programs that incentivized people reporting contamination. We've ended up with about 19,500 plus eligible petroleum contamination sites for state funding, and have cleaned up about 65% of those over those several years now. We're currently working on about over 6,100 sites that are actively being funded and worked on, leaving us with about 684 sites in that awaiting category. Some of those are awaiting agreements on either site access or one of the participation programs. We currently have 479 that are awaiting funding in the petroleum cleanup program. And that'll hopefully be addressed once we lower the funding score, hopefully not too far out. It's currently at 7, but at some point we plan to be funding all petroleum cleanup sites this fiscal year. And then we go to the non-funded, not quite as many, but almost about over 18,000 petroleum sites that were not in one of our eligible funding programs. And we've addressed about 88% of those over the years. So still about 2,000 plus active non-state funded petroleum sites under cleanup. All right, so that's sort of the the regular cleanup programs. If you think about it, a lot of work's been done, and then there's a lot more yet to be done, of course. I assume that's what a lot of the discussions here to kind of talk about how to get to, especially a lot of those remaining ones are even the more difficult to clean up sites. That's not to say that we don't have a lot of sites under monitoring and such. So sort of just switching to on the PFAS thing, I know there's Ralph's going to be talking about some of the legal up-to-date stuff going on there. I just wanted to mention first, we have been investigating PFAS sites around the state. Kind of started with our fire training facilities, sampling at dry cleaning facilities, sampling at some of our state cleanup sites that I mentioned earlier. So a lot of those sites that are on those other programs list are also on our list of known PFAS sites. We're currently at about a little over 350 of our sites where we know there's some PFAS contamination present at those sites. I mentioned there's about 29 certified fire training facilities. That's been one of our main focus areas for PFAS. About 41 of our state funded sites, and about 285 dry cleaning sites have had PFAS found at them. And then this is our just information. This is specific to the PFAS sites around Florida, but we have this for our other sites, if you want to look at any of our resources to identify where our various cleanup program sites are at. And that's that part of the story.
Perfectly on time. Can you guys hear me on this at all? We're gonna open it up for some questions for Tim. Anybody? I'm gonna give you the mic just so people can hear you and can get recorded. What? Anybody? Wow, no questions.
Is it okay if I
Wait,
ask one?
oh, sorry. I'm gonna let Ralph start and then I'll get a question over here.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Is this thing working?
You want to come up here?
Flip it up. There you go.
Oh, okay. Hello. There we go. There we go. Thank you. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate that. So in light of the fact that the federal MCL rule is under legal challenge, where does that leave the department with respect to the deadline set forth in the legislation? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and if you go back, I think I can go back, or maybe it's too late. All right, so, yeah, so we're sort of, I think if those of you that attended the Chamber Permitting Summer Course, there was several sessions on there where my boss, Deputy Secretary Kramer, talked about sort of taking a methodical approach to for Florida, moving forward with the whole PFAS arena. So we're still in that arena of evaluating our options and moving forward. I will say that the most likely path forward is the state's drinking water program adopting the federal MCLs as primary drinking water standards, and then we come along after that and adopt by reference the primary drinking water standards as cleanup target levels for our cleanup programs. The legislation that I was referring to on that slide does still require the department to get legislative ratification for the adoption of those MCLs. So that's not likely to take place next session.
Thank you.
Sure.
Second question. Yes. I'm just at the Yale. Okay.
I'm from Alabama, so I'm a little unfamiliar with the Florida way of doing things. On your brownfield sites, how are you basically identifying those? How do they come into your attention mainly?
So they can come in a variety of ways, either through a grant program, but first, to be a Florida brownfield, it requires a local government to designate the area as a brownfield site or area. And then from that area, entities can come in voluntarily and work with the department on sites. It can be one site per an area, or it can be several sites per an area if it's a large area that's been designated as a brownfield area. Sure.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, I'm Cheryl Nichols. I'm with Verdantis. I'll actually be presenting later this morning. But I just had a question about the brownfield tax credit funding. With the number of brownfield sites increasing in the state, do you foresee, or does the legislature foresee, increasing the amount of money to fund those tax credits for eligible remediations?
Yeah, I think if I understand that question about, in case you all didn't hear that, about the brownfield, what we call the VICTIC, the tax credit, the voluntary cleanup tax credit that goes along with brownfields. So it did get raised recently. So we're now up to 35 million. And that seems to be working pretty well based on the sort of the pace of work and all that. We still had a very little bit of a backlog, but I think year after year that should be put us in pretty good position to be able to at least fund the current pace of work.
And Tim, let me take a sideline off of that question. Do you see any possibility for VICTIC funding other than the corporate income tax credit, say like North Carolina's model, where it gives an offset to real property taxes or something like that?
And I'll think I have an answer for you, Howard. I don't see that, but that doesn't mean the legislature might not consider that.
Got it.
Hi, Tim, and thank you, panel. Steve Hilfiger, ERMI. I understand with the recent EPA adoption of the federal standards that in Marco, and you reiterated following up on Ralph's question, that the DEP's plan at this point is to take the state drinking water programs and adopt the federal standards. And then the Division of Waste Management will then adopt these same standards and put them into CTLs. Do you have any forecast for us in industry as to when we can expect these to take place?
No, the only thing I can say at this point is we have not, our first step would be a notice of rule development for us, for the cleanup target level development. And we have not did that notice yet, partly because we're waiting for the timing to be right for the drinking water program to adopt the primary drinking water standards as the MCLs. It's my understanding they have 2 years under their federal delegation to do that. So I would guess the timing will be something so it can be done before that 2-year time period. But I can't really tell you at this point when it'll be in advance of that.
I think that was the part that I was unclear on in Marco, was the 2-year. There was reference to a 2027 date, and there was reference to a 2029 date. And
Those are the compliance dates for the industry. That's separate from when the department needs to adopt a federal rule to maintain our authorization for that federal program.
Okay.
That's where it's my understanding that the department, any state, has 2 years from the federal MCL adoption to adopt that as a part of their drinking water standards.
Got it. All right. Thank you, Tim.
Sure.
We've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. Anybody? Come on, you've got Tim as a captive audience or semi-captive audience. Right here.
The PFAS find at the dry cleaner sites, that will be addressed under the dry cleaner program or will be a separate program?
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Could you repeat
I'm
The-
getting a lot of, sorry, a lot of background.
The PFAS contamination at the dry cleaner sites will be addressed under the dry cleaner program or will be separate?
I think if I understand, you're asking about the PFAS contamination that we're finding at dry cleaning sites. So here's our current way of dealing with that. And this is still sort of a legal review that's ongoing, is that when we find PFAS at a dry cleaning solvent site that's eligible for state funding for the solvents, it's not necessarily automatically eligible for state funding for the PFAS contamination. So what we've been doing is go ahead and moving those findings of PFAS to our state cleanup program until there's some decision made about whether the state's ultimately going to pay for that PFAS contamination at dry cleaning sites. We're not committing to doing the remediation, but we are doing the monitoring and perhaps further assessment.
Do you have a horizon for when the state may make that decision? Because that's going to be a legislative decision.
Yeah, I think it's more about depending on ultimately how PFAS gets funded across the various programs. The funding we have right now for PFAS, I think it was actually on one of those slides I showed, is we have $10 million for state-owned land PFAS cleanups. And that's what we're using to assess and remediate our certified fire training facilities that are on state colleges. And we've done one fairly large source removal at one of them, and we're looking at doing a couple more fairly large source removals at 2 more of our state college certified fire training facilities. But outside of that, we don't have dedicated PFAS cleanup monies for any of our other programs.
Got time for one last question.
Hey, Tim, you mentioned a RFP that would be coming out for petroleum products. Is that going to be related to the yellow irons or the implementation side of that, or do you have, what's that RFP going to entail? Is that the implementation, or is it still design work? Where is that in the process?
So what my understanding is, and we're still working with our procurement group on building that solicitation, but we're basically taking the EPA's contractor's remedial design and putting it out to bid.
All right, Tim, thank you very much. We
Sure.
appreciate it greatly. Our next speakers from FDOT District 4, Maria Salgado, Eric Krebill, and Pietro Taballione. Pietro.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Pietro Taballione from AECOM. I'm a car contractor with the DOT District 4 under Maria Salgado. We're going to be talking today about the FDOT Roadway Incident Response, Spill Containment, and GIS application. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of the FDOT program in place to provide emergency response and cleanup of accidents on FDOT managed roadways. We're going to cover different topics. We're going to start with the description of the FDOT roadway system. We're going to go over to talk about some truck traffic data that we acquired in the southeast Florida. We're going to talk about the different teams that respond to ERs on our roadways. Then we're going to show you some kind of a diagram protocol that we're developing at District 4. We're also going to talk about some federal and state statutes regarding spill response. And then we're going to go and dig into the more field assessment and response activities for different type of spills that we encountered in our right-of-ways. Finally, Eric from the Turnpike is going to cover his very nice application that was developed to track and manage spills along the Turnpike. The FDOT districts, first of all, the FDOT mission is and objective is to plan, develop, and maintain a Florida transportation system. Infrastructure maintained by the DOT includes highway and streets, airways, rails, seaports, spaceports, transit, and of course, an ever-expanding deployment of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. The FDOT is comprised of 7 districts and an 8th de facto district, which is the Turnpike. Sorry guys, I forgot to switch over. Just covered this slide. So the FDOT roadway system includes approximately 12,000 miles of roadways, of which approximately 500 are managed by the Turnpike. Freeways are approximately 2,000 miles, and although it's kind of a general concept, freeways are a type of highways with no access from not direct access from adjacent properties, not at grade crossings, and no traffic signals. That means the speed at which the motorists travel is much higher, and also some of the larger trucks tend to use freeway more than other roadways. So the likelihood of accidents along those highways is much higher. So that's why we look at those very closely for accidents that could lead into spills. Over here, we're gonna present a little bit of data that we gathered for the District 4 for the Southeast Florida. We have a total, for 2013, we have a total of 70,000 accidents on our roadways. Large accidents, minor accidents, that kind of includes a little bit of everything. 0.4% of those included and led to spills. Smaller spills, higher spills, for a total of 383 spills recorded in 2013, 23, sorry, for the District 4. Then we went a little bit further. We wanted to kind of provide a little bit of a trend. So with our traffic engineers, we monitored and we collected data from 3 stations, and we focused on larger trucks, semis, and usually type of vehicles with they carry cargo or they have larger tanks, so more prone to spills. As you can see on the left side, the top line is a station on the I-95. Then we have a station on the Turnpike. They're both in Palm Beach County. And the third one is a station on 75 in Broward County going east. What we try to capture over here is the traffic coming and going to the major ports in the area. So you can see that from 2014 to 2023, we have kind of a good increase in traffic volume for trucks of approximately 42% on 95, 23% on Turnpike, and another 44% on 75. So unfortunately, with more trucks on the road, there means more spills and more response on our side. To address those spills, the DOT, the FDEP, and the Florida Highway Patrols, they have implemented and endorsed a set of protocols known as the TIM, Traffic Incident Management. Those are were tailored and endorsed to cover certain spills, especially spills from motor vehicles, from private and commercial vehicles. So the goal is to provide guidance to responders so they could quickly and effectively clear up the area. They could do that in a safe way to maintain their safety. And the most important as well is to make sure there are no secondary accidents and crashes due to the first accident. The 5 key points of those guidelines, and then I want to list them, they're very important. First one on the left side, you'll see over there, stop the spill at the source. That's one of the most important. Very important as well, prevent the spreading of the spill. Third, apply absorbent material. Fourth, very important as well, collect that material and make sure it is temporarily stored until it can be disposed. Fifth, reopen the road to traffic. So those are the 5 important steps under the TIM. Very quickly, also the TIM include a recommendation and requirement for reportable quantities of 25 gallons. They need to be reported to the State Watch Office. Those are for spills into pervious surface. Anything that spills in a waterway needs to be reported to the National Response Center. I'm going to do my final slide before passing the mic to Maria, and we want to talk quickly about identifying the type of incident response. We encounter several of them. The most commonly encountered within our right-of-way are hazardous material discharges. Of course, those are due mostly to cargo. So any cargo carrying hazardous material that gets into an accident may have a chance to discharge that material. Petroleum spill is both. It's due to cargo, but also due to rupture of tanks or large trucks. Environmental crime, that's very unfortunate. We've seen more lately. There is a lot of illicit discharges along our right-of-way, and that's another set of events that we try to tackle these days. To conclude, I want to show you some other potential situations that we encounter on our right-of-way, maybe not that often, and one of them is the landing of an aircraft. That's actually happened in February on 75. So there are 2 casualties over there, and spill, of course, aviation fuel, a sinkhole and a forest fire. Those could lead to spreading a contamination directly or as a secondary by extinguishing fires and addressing the actual situation, the spill. I pass the mic to Maria Salgado, District 4 DCIC.
Thank you, Pietro. Well, I'm vertically challenged, so let's see, putting that down. Good morning. I'm here to talk to you about the section that's regarding the vehicle response in incidents. So we have in DOT several groups that are actually not located in the same location or in the same departments. So we're segregated in different areas. But what we do best is we work together to make sure that the coordination and the cleanup efforts are achieved. So many times we have to gather information to be able to figure out who's going to be working in the areas of the emergency response. So here in the bullets you're going to see is the rapid incident scene clearance contract. These first 2 bullets, which is the severe incident response vehicle contract as well, they work as a prime, like a first responder. So when an incident happens, they're the first on site. The next 3 bullets, which starts with the occupational safety and health section, that's a contract that is going to be working with us as the emergency management team that kind of gathers and coordinates the efforts of an emergency. The next one is the asset maintenance. They do the major highways that have a contractor on board to be able to take care of the cleanup in a fast manner. And the Planning Environmental Management Office, which is the office that I belong to, we take care of cleanups in areas where construction is present. So if there's a construction contractor at the time where the incident happened, we help out with the cleanup. Now, the next slide is going to talk about the District 4 Incident Spill Response Flow Diagram. So this is just to get you a general idea of how these groups work together to be able to resolve an incident. So the first quadrant that you see there is going to be the awareness of the incident. Basically, we're trying to figure out who, when, what's going on. And at that point, the first responders are there, and the DOT, 2 groups might be there, so it depends on the size of the crash that you'll have the serve and the risk together. But if it's a very minor, it's just gonna be the risk taking over to do the cleanup. And what happens at this is they apply the 90-minute rule for roadway opening. So that's really the goal at this point, is to open the road on the first box, or the first phase. Second phase would be to, once the first responders are taking care of that and they allow us in, then we start working with the responsible party to figure out if they have already on board a contract that will take care of the contamination cleanup activities, or they don't, and therefore they're going to have to pay, I suppose, or provide financial assistance so that the department, DOT, can start taking care of the incident. Once we figure out that part, we're going to phase 3, which is now activation of the cleanup contractor. So if it's a responsible party, he can activate his environmental remediation contract company that the company has on board. Or if they don't have one and they need assistance, or either the emergency response person is not available to talk, then the department takes over and sends out the emergency response group depending on jurisdiction. So the AM contractor, which is the asset management, takes care of the major roadways. If it's a construction site, then PLEMO takes care of, and any other roadways, it would be the OSH group that would take care of. So the next phase would be, now that we've activated the third phase is the activation, implementing them, doing the cleanup, and fourth would be like continue with the cleanup and make sure that the right-of-way of the DOT has been properly taken care of and structures have also been cleared up. So this takes us to the next slide, which is going to be the rules and regulations that we follow. So DOT is not a regulatory agency, so we abide by state, federal rules and regulations, and we're exempt from county and local rules, but it depends also if they are delegated programs, then we would follow their rules. So listed here are some of the major rules that we follow, and we can't do this work alone, so we always need our sister agency to assist. When we do the cleanup, what you need to know when you're doing a cleanup, if you're part of the responsible party or you are hired as a contamination assessment remediation contractor for the department, what you need to know is if you are activated by your contract manager, within 90 minutes you should be able to be on site to start remediation and cleanup. If you are not part of the department and don't have a contract with the department, then your first thing to do is to apply for a general use permit application so you can start the cleanup. This application gives you right-of-way access. So this access is granted through that permit. However, there's a shortcut because that process may take a little longer and it's not going to be resolved in 1 day or a week. So what you do is, for a shortcut, is you need to call the district that you're working, DCIC, so that would be District Contamination Impact Coordinator. They will help you to get on site that same day. It is we are very interested in you getting on to our right-of-way immediately. So if you need to get on to our property, we will grant you a car contractor to oversee your work and have you clean up on the spot the same day. So those permits will be going simultaneously. At that point, I take the responsibility to make sure that you guys are on our right-of-way, and also that my car contractor is taking care that the features are remaining as they were before, or that you're working on repairing them. So it's just kind of like I provide a security saying I vouch for you. So if you contact the DCICs, we will help you with that. Now, we don't work alone. We definitely need the DEP to help us, so they collaborate with us in these cleanups. So DEP collaboration is super important because they're the ones, our sister agencies, that help us with, one, pursuing the responsible party. They provide the oversight for the cleanup that the responsible party is taking care of on our right-of-way. So to protect our features, make sure that they're not blocking roads, because the point is we need to have roads open. Also, they provide updates to us on the remediation cleanup. As a DCIC, I take an extra move, and I always send out part of the mornings or every day that you're there. We spot check the work, making sure that the areas are still as they were when the accident happened, or at least that their features are being protected. So the DCIC always has a little watch over these type of activities. So now, where do we get the help from? On a weekly basis, we receive an email with the State Watch Office on calls, who's on call that week. So we receive an email with the phone numbers, the contact of every district that has how the DEPs are gonna coming to our assistance. So this is the map you're gonna see there is where these offices are located, and on the right side, you're gonna see their phone numbers and contact information. So now, the next step is gonna be Eric Krebill, District 4 DCIC. My counterpart, he's going to be talking about the next section.
Actually, I'm Turnpike.
What did I say?
It said D4. That's okay. So most fuel spills that occur that are non-cargo are less than 300 gallons. And that's because a semi-truck, which is the bigger truck out there, has 2 saddle tanks, and each one holds 120 to 150 gallons of diesel fuel. Unfortunately, those tanks are positioned so they can rupture easily if they contact guardrail or Jersey barriers or other objects. And commercial trucks are our biggest spiller. We hardly have any spills associated with passenger vehicles or trucks. Oh, I gotta do this too, huh? Sorry about that. So roadway construction has a drainage design component, and a spill pathway is gonna follow that drainage design. This one here, we had a vehicle that crashed on the pavement. The fuel ran down the pavement to a catch basin and then actually flowed into the water. And so during the initial response action, the risk contractor applied absorbents like they usually do. These are granular, formulated to absorb oil and repel water. They collect that, sweep it up, and put it in containers for disposal. And the risk contractor, their responsibility ends at the pavement, so anything that's impacted beyond the pavement has to be a follow-up cleanup that's performed by a different hazmat type subcontractor. The storm drains are typically cleaned up using sorbent booms or vacuum trucks or pumps to remove fluids and sorbents. If they're clogged, they can use high pressure jetting like this one. They can use soil vacuums to collect the debris, the impacted sediment in the catch basins and impacted soil. Here they've put a boom down there to try and catch residuals. This is an incident that got the newspaper when a truck crashed on the bridge. You can see the fuel tanks fell off on the ground below. Significant damage on the bridge, and the responder in this case used sorbent pads instead of granular. Here's a train wreck that occurred that D4 provided a response to. The diesel fuel from the train had seeped through the railroad bed and had pooled up on compacted soil beneath the bed. So they were using a vacuum truck to try and remove that pooled fuel. They decided that they needed to remove some contaminated soil, so they actually had to remove a section of track there, remove the railroad bed, dig it out, and then reconstruct the whole thing again. Within right-of-way, excavation, mechanical excavations predominantly used to remove soil impacted by petroleum, and we use the soft dig, soil vacuum, or hand digging around utilities. Here's a vehicle that crashed in the water. On the right, you can see these guys are using booms to contain the plume, and they're using sorbent blankets to try and soak up the sheen. On the left, it's another approach. They're doing vacuum skimming. There's a guy there with a leaf blower, and what they're doing is they're pulling these booms closer together and using the leaf blower to try and direct the sheen over there to the skimmer. And on the right side, there's somebody spraying a microbial formulation of wetting agents and nutrients and microbes onto a sheen. And I was told that an hour later the sheen had disappeared, so that seemed quite effective. At the time of the incident, they don't clean up the soil in general. They often cover it up to try and protect it from stormwater. Then the contractor applies for their general use permit, comes back and does the excavation. We also get illicit discharges. Sources might be an unreported incident, could be containers abandoned or disposed of in the right-of-way that occurs, or it could be a storm drain that has an outfall into the DOT drainage system. And that's what we think happened on this one. You can see the impacts were quite significant. So when they're doing excavation of petroleum impacted soil, we're using the organic vapor analyzer and to direct the excavation. And in addition to having a table like a map like this, we need to have a table documenting all the soil OVA measurements at the different locations and depths. And the goal here is to demonstrate that we've removed impacted soil that exhibits an OVA reading of 10 parts per million or more, and that's in accordance with 62780.500. So there's a lot of information that needs to be collected at the incident scene. We need to know who the responsible party is, how much was spilled, what was cleaned up, what remains to be cleaned up, and who's gonna clean it up, who's gonna pay for that. So at Turnpike, we came up with an app that we've used, which is you can get on your cell phone. It's called Field Maps, and we configured that to an ArcGIS layer that Turnpike has. And with this app, it provides prompts on your cell phone. So the roadway representative that goes out to evaluate property damage can fill this out and provide the information that we're looking for to make sure that we can get going on any further cleanup. That uploads to a GIS layer, and this GIS layer, you can see all those icons. Those are all incidents. Somebody else with access to the GIS can go in and click on an icon and see what's going on. These things come up right after they're submitted in the field. That GIS layer uploads to a SharePoint that we use for tracking. The SharePoint's very useful. You know, we've got hundreds and hundreds of incidents now since 2020, and I think we're up to close to 400 incidents that we're tracking. We use color coding buttons like red saying it's not cleaned up, and green means good. There's more layers here. If you click on the incident, you could get to information where you could add comments, documenting collaboration and coordination for the cleanup activities. So we've also found that the SharePoint's useful for drainage design purposes and other roadway improvement projects, because we upload all of our reports and you know, disposal manifest, a source removal report, a DEP approval letter of the report, and those items aren't uploaded to the Oculus public domain. So how else would we find them, right? You've got to contact your DOT to get that information. But that information certainly is useful when we're trying to do design of new roadway projects. So Maria's going to come up and talk about some contractual opportunities real quickly.
This will be really brief. I just wanted to talk about the remediation contract opportunities we're having at the district. We are looking for couple of contracts. Well, two of them are in the Planning Environmental Management Office, and these are district-wide, which means that you have 5 to 3 year contracts that are $5 million each. So two are in the PLEMO office, where I belong, and one is in the Office of Safety, which is the OSH group. They have one that's coming up. So the one in PLEMO will be advertised in April of 2025, and the two, and then there's the one in July of 2025 that will be up and ready for advertisement. So July and April, we're going to be having the advertisement. There's also advertisements for the two typical first responders group, which is going to be those are subcontractors. So a car and a subcontractor is different because one is a district-wide and one is just the sub of a prime. So those are different because the risk and the asset management contract, they have subs that are remedial contractors like you guys. So we are ready for you guys to apply whenever there's an opportunity, and we invite you.
Thank you guys very much. We've got a few minutes left for questions for Maria, Eric, and Pietro.
Hi. You may have said this and I may have missed it, but who has access to the DOT app? Is that the public, and do you share it with DEP emergency response team?
So every district would have their own application. So Eric's district, Eric's Turnpike area, he manages that one, and I would manage the one in District 4, so it's by location. And in reality, the data or the application is only internal at this point. We do share it. We have a SharePoint where we would share it with DEP if needed, but it doesn't like naturally go to the DEP, so it's not one of those shared access. Right now, it's solely the department's information, but we're government, so you ask for it, we give it to you.
How do we? Oh, sorry, someone else.
Go ahead.
How do we get involved with the application to be able to be a contractor or subcontractor to be able to get some of these DOT spills?
So on DOT in general has a location where the advertisements come in general for all the contracts. Mm-hmm. If you go on the website where the general advertisements come up, they will be coming up by names and by contracts. So if you have a difficulty finding them, just contact your local DCIC and they will tell you when the next advertisement will be available.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We need to move on to Ralph. Thank you guys very much.
We'll have an opportunity.
Thanks, Howard, and I want to thank the organizers of this, Eugene, for putting on another wonderful program. It just seems to get bigger and better every year. I think this is my 5th year speaking at it. I've been coming to it for decades. And I want to do something a little differently. I mean, we have the presentation here, and I'm going to roll through this very quickly. You can look at it on your own. But I was thinking about this as I was driving down from Tallahassee. 8 years ago to the date, I was doing an update on federal and state environmental law for my client about 5 minutes from here. And I said something I'd never said before, and I'm going to say it again now. Based on the results of today's election, pretty much everything I'm going to tell you might be wrong because it will change with the politics. That's an inevitability. I'm sure all of you appreciate that. I certainly do as a lawyer. What I mean by that is during the Trump administration, there was not a priority placed on this chemical, or frankly any chemical, and some would say, or on environmental response. EPA has been studying this for 20 years, but it was basically backburnered, if you will. But then 4 years later, in the run-up to the last election, Joe Biden identified in his platform one chemical and one chemical only that he said was going to be a priority for him. Guess what that was? PFAS. And in fact, EPA was ordered to fast-track their regulations, their rulemaking, and also the listing as a hazardous substance. That has occurred. But if there's a change again, I don't know where that leaves us. That's partly why I was asking Tim, where does that leave the state or all the states? Because there could very well be that the MCLs go away, and as shocking and horrifying as it may sound, the EPA might go away. There's been talk about that. And that seems inconceivable. I've been practicing environmental law for 40 years. But that's not out of the question that that could happen, okay? Now, some of you have heard me say this before, so I apologize. I can only think of so many jokes to tell, but it's commonly referred to as the forever chemical because of its persistence, but I refer to it as the everywhere chemical because it's pretty much everywhere. I work now with airports, wastewater treatment systems, fire departments, waste management companies, public water utilities, and I get asked, you know, all the time, well, should we test for it? And my cryptic answer is only if you want to find it, because the probability is you will find it. And again, I've dealt with, like many of you, arsenic, BTEX, you know, perchloroethylene, metals, dioxins. I've never seen an environmental challenge greater than this one, and that's not an exaggeration. And the last kind of broad comment I'll make is, I've said this before, there's not enough gold in Fort Knox to pay for a cleanup if we are looking at a parts per trillion number for drinking water, and as Tim alluded to, that would be adopted as a GCTL applicable to all potable groundwater. It's mind-boggling, truly. I want to read to you something, you know, because we like to keep you current here. This just literally came out, if I can pull it up. This appeared in yesterday's phys.org. It's a study done by FIU down in Miami. I love the title of the study. Rainwater samples reveal it's literally raining forever chemicals in Miami. And if you're interested in the article, I can send it to you. PFAS are in Miami's rainwater, and it's the latest evidence the synthetic forever chemicals that have raised health concerns for people and wildlife hitch a ride on the water cycle using the complex systems to circulate over greater distances. Just another couple of excerpts. For more than a year, FIU researchers collected and analyzed 42 rainwater samples across 3 different sites in Miami-Dade County. A total of 21 PFAS substances were detected, including PFOS and PFOA, as well as newer varieties used in manufacturing today. Okay. One of the assistant professors of chemistry said PFAS are practically everywhere. Now we're able to show the role air masses play in potentially bringing these pollutants to other places where they can impact surface water and groundwater. One of my good friends that many of you know, Dr. Chris Teef, since retired, said a few years ago at the Marco presentation that PFAS was actually found at the top of Mount Everest, okay, in detectable numbers. And that was as a result of air deposition, and also it's in the fire retardant clothing that the mountain climbers wear, and they leave it up there, and it eventually leaches out. The point of this is, it's to say the least incipient, it's to say the least everywhere, it's to say the least persistent, and we don't know what to do about that, and we're struggling with it. That's why I asked Tim that question. The people I work with are struggling with it. I represent 6 airports in the state of Florida. We're slowly transitioning to the new generation of flame retardant AFFF foam that has very, very trace amounts of PFAS constituents in it. But in talking to fire chiefs, they're very nervous about that because they're accustomed to using the AFFF foam that has PFAS in it because it's highly effective. And one of the fire chiefs of a major municipality in Florida said to me after I explained to him a few years ago the challenges, he said, so let me get this straight. If I get a call from the airport and there's a plane crash and it's on fire and there's, you know, it's a jumbo jet, so there's 230 people inside, and I rush to the scene and I've got my PFAS containing equipment, I have to make a judgment on the spot. I can put out the fire and save lives, but in the process I'll be causing environmental contamination and I'll be exposing my government to liability for that. He said, or I can say, well, let them burn, and I don't want to harm the environment or cause risk. He said, what do you think I'm going to do, Ralph? Well, of course, he's going to take care of the people. In so doing, exposing the environment to significant concentrations of these foams and the government to liability. So that brings us to the next part of my discussion, and I'll roll quickly ahead to this. Again, all this is for your benefit if you want to look at it. But airports are of particular concern. Other than manufacturing facilities, they are probably the sites where the most PFAS is found, because it's the sites where for decades, under approved FAA rules, used it. And I was just going to say, it isn't just approved, it was required, okay? So think about that for a minute. So the federal government requires regulated airports, commercial airports like the one, in Orlando, and if they have to use it, otherwise they lose their licenses, right? Knowing, even to this day, that it's causing environmental problems. So at the national level, with some of the airport groups, and at the state level, the Florida Airports Council, which I work with, we are working very, very hard. We actually were part of the group that helped pass the legislation that Tim referred to, which, I call it, D-Day, or maybe PFAS Day is coming in January. What do we do? But we're working now, and I'm sure Tim knows this, it's no secret, to try to get some relief from the legislature in the upcoming session, because truly, there's not a local government in this state, I don't know if there's one in the country, that can pay the freight to deal with the PFAS problem with the current proposals in place, with the MCLs, et cetera. And Tim said they're looking at adopting that. Let me just give you one example. One airport, one major municipal airport, which will be unnamed, did an environmental impact analysis, determined that based on the federal proposed MCL, it would cost $250 million to address the PFAS at its site. I have another airport that's a small one, about $50 million. It's just, these are mind-boggling numbers, right? And the other problem, and this is a remediation conference, and I'm not going to get into the technical stuff. You're going to have a really good panel this afternoon to talk about that. Right now, we're still looking, there's a lot of, better mousetraps out there, but we're still looking at pump, treat, and filtration, which is astonishingly inefficient, very expensive. What do you do with the spent filter cakes? Is it hazardous? I mean, is the EPA's classifying PFAS waste as hazardous substances? Does it become a RCRA waste? Again, it's beyond belief what's happening out there. So we're still looking at ways to deal with that at the federal level through some legislative breaks, and at the state level as well. And we've been working closely with the department in Florida and with the EPA in Washington. Okay, again, I'm going to skip all of this to focus on, Tim's already talked about that, to talk about the litigation, okay? I've got 4 municipalities, all that operate airports, fire training stations, fire departments, wastewater treatment plants, and public water systems that are impacted by PFAS to various degrees. They're all part of what's called the multi-district litigation that's pending in South Carolina federal court. And people ask me all the time, well, why South Carolina? The way the federal system works with these mass multi-district litigation is they basically, it was explained to me, asked all the courts, hey, anybody want to do this? And I think the federal judge in South Carolina probably regrets it, but he raised his hand, and now he's managing over 2,000 cases. Just an astonishing, and they're being filed more every day, okay? So these are national cases. You don't have a choice. If you have a PFAS claim, whether you file it on your own and in federal court or in the multi-district court, or you file it in a separate court, it gets removed to the federal litigation, because it's the only way to manage it and to avoid inconsistent and conflicting conclusions. And also the discovery is mind-boggling. We've only had, let me move ahead here. these are all the ones just in Florida, okay? 2 pages, okay? And there's one missing off of that. There'll be another one being filed shortly. But there are 20, I think, last count, primarily local governments. But interestingly enough, 2 years ago, the state of Florida decided it had to sue. And so the state of Florida brought its own suit in Hillsborough County, and it was removed to the federal area. And that tells you, to the federal litigation. That tells you something, though, doesn't it? I think the state of Florida looked around and realized what I've been saying. This is an unbelievably overwhelming and seemingly insurmountable task to deal with this in multimedia at, all across the state of Florida, and how to fund that. And the only real money that's available, unless literally trillions of dollars are freed up by the feds, and I don't think that's likely under any administration, and unless we get liability relief, which we haven't gotten yet, you got to look to the manufacturers, right? And that's what the multi-district litigation is. It's against about 20 or so of the major manufacturers. At the top of the list is 3M, DuPont, Nemours, and some of the others, Tyco. And if you want to get another sense of the order of magnitude of what's been going on, I thought you would find this very interesting, okay? There's been a settlement already, several settlements, and this is just of the public water system cases. That's important to understand. There's 3 broad categories of claims. One is brought by public water systems against the manufacturers. One are so-called environmental cases, meaning it's in the groundwater, it's in the surface water, it's in the soils, but it's not affecting a public water system. The third are personal injury claims, okay? So far, after 8 years or so of this multi-district litigation going on in federal court, the only claims that have been addressed are the public water system claims. So 3M is, you see the numbers there, pretty astounding, is paying $10 million up to 12 just for public water systems. Chemours, DuPont, Corteva are going to pay $1.85 billion for drinking water. Tyco has recently agreed to pay $750 million, and BASF $312 million. So this demonstrates to you what I've been saying about the astonishing numbers. And that's just one group of the claims that are out there. The ones that are scaring the heck out of everybody are the personal injury claims. And trust me when I tell you, the personal injury plaintiffs' lawyers are circling around all these facilities. They're signing up thousands of people. Some of them have already brought claims. We haven't seen a lot of that in Florida yet. And that's because I think they're waiting to see what happens with the standards. Because the standards, the criteria, the MCLs, the GCTLs weigh into the liability. What are the numbers? What are the reference numbers? What are the health-based numbers? But again, I can't even wrap my mind around what that's going to mean in the long run. The closest I can come to telling you what it's going to look like is in one Midwestern state, a firefighters union brought one of the very first personal injury claims about 4 years ago. It was settled just for one group of potential plaintiffs in one state. They paid $750 million in settlements for the personal injury claims. So again, do the math. The last thing I want to point out relating to the litigation is the inevitable bankruptcies. We predicted a few years ago these will come. Even these mega corporations, multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporations, cannot afford to pay this freight in the long run. And it's a real fear, and that fear was realized last year when one of the defendants, Kitty Fenwell, filed for bankruptcy. That bankruptcy proceeding is still pending in Delaware federal court. I have a couple of claims in there because we sued them, their companies. It really is just hard to really fathom. This is the kind of problem that cries out for federal government intervention, because that's where the more likely relief can come in terms of making dollars available to the states and giving some kind of liability protection, but it hasn't come yet. This is a little bit more about the public water system settlements, and I won't go into the details on that so we can save time for questions. That's a little bit more about the bankruptcy, and there's some links, so I'll wrap it up.
You've got 2 more.
I'm good.
Okay. Let's open it up for some questions for Ralph, and I think we're walking around with a microphone right now.
We have one right here.
Hey,
Hi, thank you, Ralph.
Hey,
Appreciate
Steve.
it.
Yeah.
Obviously, the cattle dip precedent in Florida. Is it possible in Florida, at least, based on the precedent established with cattle dipping vats, which were federal mandates from 1906 to 1961, to apply that precedent for PFAS liability protection in Florida?
And I know Steve well, he's a friend, but this isn't a setup, but I actually co-authored that legislation many years ago at my former law firm, Hoppin, Green and Sams. And for those of you that don't know, another widespread problem is for decades, cattle farmers ran their cattle into these vats that ran up to about their shoulders, and they filled them with whatever the pesticide of the day was, and it was lead arsenate. So thousands of head of cattle on thousands of farms on, hundreds of thousands of acres all over the state for decades were contaminated because, think about it, the cattle run through this, vat, they run all over the property, dripping the lead arsenate onto the ground. And it's everywhere, and arsenic is one of those, of course, forever chemicals as well. So what we proposed on behalf of some of the ag interests was an immunity, if you will. And there were certain criteria that had to be met, and it's actually worked quite well. The only time you have to do anything is if you want to open that property up for development, redevelopment, then you have to address it. But as it's just sitting there, if it continues to be operated as a cattle farm or other ag purposes. So to answer your question, yes, we have actually proposed that. Another example that we've proposed is what happened with the EDB program. I actually represented the chemical industry during the EDB litigation, and we ended up with a settlement with the state where we created a fund that would pay for the placement of carbon filters on any well and any tap that came up over the 0.02 parts per billion criteria. I think it's the only other time that we had a parts per trillion number than as we do now. That worked quite well, but EDB at the time was a major statewide problem, national problem. I worked on cases in California and Hawaii because it was used literally from Pensacola down to Miami on every golf course, every citrus grove, every row crop, peanut farms. But it tended to, through hydrolysis, go away much more quickly. It broke down. It wasn't persistent like PFAS. That's the difference. So those are great thoughts. Those are great suggestions. We welcome them. We're on an informal work group with airports and fire departments and solid waste facilities and the department trying to come up with solutions, but the silver bullet has not been identified yet.
And similarly to EDB, the follow-up question, not only are there government liability protection precedents, but also over the course of 40 years, we have developed numerous anthropogenic precedents to help with liability protection, assessment, remediation. The rainfall study is very interesting to the anthropogenic application, similar to benzoylpyrene, arsenic, and other anthropogenic sources of contamination. So I'm interested to see where that goes.
Yeah, I think we all are. And again, I wish I had the answer. I don't. But we got to find them quick.
Thank you. Quick clarification because it's already been referenced with all due respect to my colleague incorrectly. The data from the study at Miami-Dade County for rainwater, you need to look at the data the data for PFOS and the established MCLs is well below that criteria. It's unfortunately, many times those articles refer to the summation of the PFAS, and then if you do not look at the specific data, you may arrive at the wrong conclusion. So that's not an indication of anthropogenic groundwater quality. Second clarification is that your PFAS data are at least in Miami-Dade County, you do have a reduction once you move away from very clear known sources. There is, but the concentrations are not similar. Any analysis will indicate that. Number two, for the proposal of the immunity in reference to the arsenic and the DEP, it's important to make a distinction that you have pointed out very well. The impact and the fate and transfer of the PFAS is not similar to the path with the arsenic. Number two, those exposure units were clearly different when you have sources contributing to potable wells, municipal wells. It's a different pathway that requires, with all due respect, a different solution, because otherwise you will not address the human health exposure. So just a few comments. Thank you.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's why I made that point. It isn't arsenic. It isn't any of these other chemicals, and that's why. But we're looking for answers, and we don't know where to find them. By the way, you're also right about looking at the data. If you are interested, the atmospheric pollution research from April of 2024 publication is where this was published, and it, again, just came out on phys.org. But I highly recommend that you all look at all of this information. It just shows the comprehensive challenge that we're dealing with.
And look closely at the data, because a lot of data is starting to come out. Public potable water supply systems are now starting to report, listing it as a non-regulated chemical, PFAS and PFOA, in their water quality reports. My hometown, Fort Lauderdale, listed theirs in their 2024 report. The numbers look phenomenal until you realize they were reporting in parts per million, not parts per trillion. Then they didn't look so great. So be careful to look through the data as the scientists that you guys all are.
I just have some questions on the airports, and it's more of an opinion. Being that a study just came out saying that the non-fluorinated foams are more acutely toxic than the AFFF itself, and the and the fact that around the world, looking at places like Australia, they've moved to a model where it's more of a how do we minimize the environmental impact using things like aggregate that collects the PFAS and doesn't allow it to filter into the groundwater. Do you think that eventually in a lot of our regulations we'll be looking at more towards that model than just banning it itself?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Of course, the source of the latest data in the entities that are doing the most work are the DOD facilities. You know, when you print money, you can do things like that. And they came out with the alternative that's now been adopted by the EPA, excuse me, by the FAA as an alternative. You're exactly right. There are still problems with the alternative AFFF, the so-called non-fluoridated one. But I'm told that it has a lower amount of PFAS. But yeah, then we find out, you know, that there's other things in it. I mean, it reminds me again of EDB. And the agencies do what they can. I mean, not to get too much into the soil, but the reason that we had an EDB crisis is because nematodes, these microscopic worms, were devastating crops and golf courses and citrus groves throughout the entire state of Florida, destroying these major industries. The chemical that was produced to do that, EDB, was proven to be highly effective, but when it was learned that it was ending up in the drinking water and it was toxic, we replaced it with DBCP, another chemical. Well, guess what? 3-4 years later, these studies came out and said, oh my gosh, that's bad too. It's a problem, needless to say, and I don't know whether we're going to go in that direction or not, but I can tell you many, many major studies are underway to try to find an alternative. That might be one of them. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
So the DOD itself doesn't even want to use the foam that they help Right now, they went in front of Congress and they asked for an extension because they don't
Yeah.
want to put it on
Yeah.
the ships because it won't put out jet fuel fires.
That's right. I mean, again, it comes back to, I know we have to stop, but it comes back to what I said earlier. This fire chief said, I'm going to use what's going to work. That's my job. That's my BMP. And I'm sorry if it causes environmental harm, but I got to worry about, you know, human lives. Burning children. Yeah, I mean, it's gross, but it's the truth. And that's what most airports, again, regulated airports, commercial airports, are still using. And I say one more point. It's massively expensive to convert your systems from the AFFF fluoridated to the new one. Believe it or not, you can't even use the same fire equipment. You can't use the same fire trucks. You can't use the same piping. You have to basically trash it. And that's because the chemical is so persistent. And not to get into the chemistry, but the reason it's so effective, and I don't know if you remember, but the very first cases in this involved the DuPont Teflon on pots and pans, right, that we all had. And we learned that as you're scraping, you know, a spoon or whatever, it comes off, gets in your food, and you get into trouble. Well, it's because it's sticky and it's highly flame retardant. So the very chemical properties that make it effective are what make it almost impossible to get rid of, including in these equipment. The average fire truck is $5 million, by the way.
Even lab testing equipment.
Lab testing equipment, right. So, like I said, I've never seen in 40 years a bigger problem. I haven't seen any panacea yet. Hopefully we'll arrive at one. And again, pay attention to the election results tonight, because that could make a difference.